Hello and welcome to the pod. I'm Nathan Fink.
I'm Jasmine Torres Allen, and this is New Hampshire Family Now,
a show about building family in the Granite State. Today in the show, Jasmine and I share our family's superpowers and maybe a little kryptonite. And later, Dr. Marti Erickson joins us to talk Mom Enough podcast and the many ways family can supercharge human potential. New Hampshire Family Now is brought to you by the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. Since 1962, the Charitable Foundation has worked hand in hand with generous and visionary citizens to maximize the power of giving and support, collaborate, and lead innovative initiatives. Initiatives like New Hampshire Tomorrow, which is focused on making sure children and families have access to education, healthcare, and career pathways to ensure every family member thrives. To learn more about New Hampshire Charitable Foundation and all their initiatives, go to www.nhcf.org. This podcast was also brought to you by Family Support New Hampshire. Family Support New Hampshire is NH's coalition of family resource centers and family strengthening programs that exist to ensure Granite State families have access to resources so both caregivers and children can succeed, because supported families are strong families. To find a family resource center near you, visit www.fsnh.org. Hello and welcome to the Season 4 premiere of the podcast.
Where'd all these people come from? Are they your friends?
So we have a fantastic show today, including an interview with Dr. Marti Erickson, a brilliant mind in the world of parenting and child development. But first, a new year, new us.
That's right.
It's only mid-January and I've lost 10 pounds.
Yeah, I feel like everybody's a little bit sick.
No, I actually meant there's this jar I have at home with foreign currency. It has 10 British pounds in it and I can't find it, so... LBs, though.
In the literal sense.
In the literal sense. But actually, that's not the worst transition, because I've been thinking a lot about clarity in my life, because 2024...
That's my word of the year, is clarity.
It really?
Yeah, that's so crazy that you said that. That's my word of the year.
Okay, so... Tell me, how did it become your word of the year and why?
It became my word of the year because my 20s has been all about figuring out who I am. And now that I'm going to be 30, I was like, okay, this is the year for clarity, like kind of thinking about what kind of person I want to be in my 30s.
That's interesting, because you can't get to clarity without looking backward.
Absolutely.
Right?
There's tons of self-reflection when you think about like clarity, right? You think about all the things that you did, all the good things, all the bad things, and you start to put them in kind of a collection in a timeline.
Because it starts with now, what do I think? But then what do I do? Why do I do what I do? Based on what I think or thought I think?
Yeah, well, that was a mouthful, and down the rabbit hole we go, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it's also like then you layer that over our context as parents of young children. But it's one of those things where I've been thinking about this a lot lately, because I've been thinking about the way I view our family and then taking that step backward and say, wait a minute, what does family mean to me?
Absolutely.
As a word, as a concept, right? And starting backward, like when you were younger, prior to building your own, what did the word family mean to you? Was it active? Was it passive? Like, how would you describe it then?
I grew up in a very intergenerational household. So for me, I was always surrounded by elders and little kids and every age in between. And so family always felt like I was learning. Mm-hmm. But my family did a really good job of creating community. And so I always had that community support behind me. And so family for me felt like there's always someone there.
I'm wrestling with this because I'm trying to figure out whether or not, did I think family was passive? Was it something done to you? You're kind of describing it as living and breathing, or really like this active thing.
Yeah, like fluid. It was always fluid. There was always something going on for me. Now with my kids, like the way I grew up was you always had to show affection. It was a sign of respect in terms of like physical affection. So like hugs and kisses and things like that. Now I'm very different with my kids in the sense of like, I let them choose to participate in those things.
Right.
And so
that's interesting.
That is very interesting. And it can get very dicey because people feel very differently about those things, especially when you come from like a cultural background that I come from. And so it's one of those things where now I think I let my kids choose to participate in certain things and let them choose what they don't want to participate in.
I can see that being a boon for the development of agency in a person, choice and agency. But what's interesting is what you described from your childhood. And this is kind of where I'm like wrestling with that, and it's not describing things I think as good or bad.
Yes, exactly.
It's existing.
Yes.
And then choosing in our roles now whether or not this should exist.
Absolutely. Because there are some things I think I've learned to grieve and let go as like traditions that might have to stop with me. And then there are other parts where I'm like, I'm so happy to keep passing along certain traditions that make me feel proud. But it's always a balance of choice.
Right.
Those choices are not happy ones. And what I like to say is sometimes the lows are really low. You just have to understand that you can get through that low or through that tough choice.
Right. It makes me so proud of you, proud of us in this generation of parents where we're having these. And I think I've been thinking about this a lot lately in terms of that glue. Like, what does a family's center look like? I've been referring to it a lot, actually, as this kind of super force, like a superpower, right? Like every family has its own superpower, the thing that drives it along that you rely on. But when I think about it, my own family, I keep coming back to humor. And I maybe it's like my own background of trauma history. I was kind of the laugh track.
Yeah, definitely.
And so pressures elicit jokes. And what's interesting is I've been noticing that is where our family laughs together.
Actually, I was thinking about this before you came because I was trying to think about what our family dynamic was. And, I have 2 kids who are high special needs. And sometimes those days are really tough and it's hard to think about a superpower. But one thing that I really noticed was that when we have a really tough day, we all have really deep compassion. That's like our superpower, is like that level of compassion towards each other. Empathy. And the thing is like empathy isn't really learned till about age like 4, 5, and 6. Like those age ranges, that's when they really start to understand empathy. And my daughter's 6 now. So I've started to notice her level of compassion when like Jackson's having a really bad day. Or, if she sees me that I'm sick and she just comes over and she's like, I'm so sorry you're sick, mommy. And she gives me a hug. And there's that level of empathy and compassion.
Right.
And so for me, I was like, that's our superpower, because every time one of our friends is sick, we show up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that level of empathy and compassion and understanding that when someone's having a hard time, we show up for each other.
Yeah, you rally.
Yeah.
And with superpowers, I've also been thinking about kryptonite. But I've been thinking about this a lot in the way that we approach things like our roles or technology or even like substances, how we, imbibe in something and why we do it. And like, I think that our kryptonite is emotional distance. Because it's when we have emotional distance, we have isolation right next to somebody like you've never felt.
Well, that's interesting, kryptonite, because I often think about like, what is it that makes it hard to be within the family, like as a part of the family? And maybe I don't hate to say it, but technology is definitely like our kryptonite, because I feel like the TV is on sometimes in the background, or sometimes my husband and I have such a really long day and all he wants to do when he gets home is like scroll through his phone, and your kids are like so off the wall, and like you're like, all right, I just want to sit here for a moment and just lose myself in technology, basically. And then I realize it's those moments where if I don't put my phone down, if I don't put my laptop away, and my kids are staring right at me, or they're within the same room as me, and I'm not like paying attention, or at least involving myself in their world. Right. That's when I feel like it becomes my kryptonite, or our kryptonite is like, we lose that moment of connection. Or, if one of my kids asks me like, can you play with me? And I'm like, I'm so sorry, sweetie, I got to clean this up, or I got to do this. And
because there's always things to clean. There's
always something to do. Right. And so you don't realize that moment of, can you play with me, is their way of asking for connection, because they don't know how to express it any other way. And it's just one of those moments where, all right, that's my kryptonite.
It's interesting that you say that, because I'm starting to think empathy probably helps you get through those moments of tech, right?
Yes.
Because You just said it. Your husband comes home, long day. You're like already empathizing with a rationale of why that would be the case.
Right. And the thing is like, we're human. Those moments frustrate us as partners and caregivers. And, sometimes you're like, well, I've had a long day too. Like, I want to be able to sit and scroll and all that stuff. But like I said, that clarity in that moment where you realize like, dang, like I totally understand where you're coming from.
Right. And we'd love to hear about your family's superpower. Give us a call and leave a message at 603-415-0329. That's 603-415-0329. And when we come back, we welcome Dr. Marti Erickson. Don't go anywhere. Today's episode was brought to you by Upreach Therapeutic Equestrian Center. Located in Goffstown, New Hampshire, Upreach partners with the power of horse to create strong children, strong families, and strong communities. To learn more about Upreach Therapeutic Equestrian Center and its many inspirational programs, visit upreachtec.org. That's upreachtec.org. Today's show was also brought to you by Burgoo Media, a full-service media company dedicated to helping nonprofits realize impact stories for print, video, social, and legacy media, and more. Both budget-conscious and grant-friendly, Burgoo Media helps your organization celebrate the humans in human services. Learn more at burgoomedia.com. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. And for our season 4 premiere, I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Marti Erickson, who, among a storied career at the University of Minnesota and many other accomplishments, served as the founding director of the Children, Youth, and Family Consortium, and who specializes in linking research practice and policy in the areas of parent-child attachment, child abuse prevention, and children's mental health. Marti, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Nathan. It's just a delight to be here with you. And I really admire the work you're doing for children. It's just remarkable.
Well, I appreciate that. And I have to pass that right back because I am fascinated by your own podcast, which we'll talk about later, Mom Enough. But for the record, I got to say that I laughed out loud when I realized it wasn't Mom Enough, as in, are you momming enough? But that it was Mom Enough.
Well, you know why you got that idea? Because one of our most popular pictures, which we used to have as the cover of our website, but we've just changed it up, because it'd been a few years, but it shows a picture of my daughter and me with a blackboard behind where my daughter wrote "Mom, enough" with an exclamation point. And that's because she says that to me all the time. She always has, And I suppose I said that to my mother too. I don't know. But anyway, that's a lot. That is another facet of Mom Enough, because we want to really address the idea of what does it mean to be mom enough with your child? Are you mom too little? Are you mom too much? Or mom enough? And what does that really mean? What do children need? And what do we maybe drive ourselves crazy trying to give them that really doesn't add value?
Yes.
But also those dynamics of mother-daughter relationships, and Mom Enough is another facet of that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. And, my co-host Jasmine and I think about this a lot. What is our role in our relationships with our children? What is our role in that family unit? And, because of our backgrounds being different, we've also been wrestling with the idea of family in general. Over time, for me, as a father of young children, I have changed in the way I view it from, is it an active thing? Is it a passive thing? How do we interpret family as a topic? How do we define it? And so I wanted to ask you, when you kind of step up to that 30,000 foot level and you think about family, why is this grouping so vital to those in our care?
Oh, that's such a good question, Nathan. And I think we sometimes as a society have gotten hung up on the structure and who the members of a family are rather than the function of family. And so that's just the essence really of what we ought to be talking about with regard to families. And there's so many different ways to think about this, but I think a central way is that these are the people, whoever they are, 2 dads, 2 moms, a mom and a dad, some grandparents, aunts and uncles, whoever's thrown in there, who are responsible for the basic care and guidance and protection of children. And that it has always, I think, been the primary function of families. And so when we think about that and how it really plays out in any period of time or in any place, families really, by definition, if they're going to function, need to be a team.
Yeah.
And that means, with regard to children and our topic today, we really need, as families, to get on the same page in terms of how we want to care for this child, what we want them to be like as they grow up. I don't mean little things like, what career they're going to choose. That really is a little thing in the grand scheme of things. But what kind of character they're going to have, how they're going to feel about themselves, how they're going to nurture and protect their own health, and so on. So a family really has to become a team, thinking about those things, being intentional and reflective about those things.
Yeah.
And then the other really important part of that is thinking about how they're going to support each other in doing that. And that concept of support is what really determines whether parents and other members of a family are going to be able to carry out those important responsibilities.
I'm so glad you gave us a little value structure there, because I think that you kind of inverted this pyramid of what we think of as big and little. Character being at the center, because if you have that, then everything else is going to be a little thing. So I'm in the thick of it with these two young children, and I almost think of family as like this primordial soup, this thing, right? It is, because you have all these component pieces for growth and development that, like, when or if they align, family's got this powerful force that can like supercharge human potential. So I was hoping that you could maybe speak to the role family plays in setting up some of these foundation pieces that you had mentioned.
Sure. And, I love that concept of supercharging human potential. And I've never used that phrase before, so I'm glad you gave that to me. And it will be in my future speeches and media appearances, because it really, I think, captures what's so important. And I think that there are several aspects of human potential that are most likely to be supercharged by good enough parents and other caregivers in those earliest months and years of life. And when we're talking about the foundations of human development and human potential, we really have to think about those earliest months and years. So I would really emphasize, and this will be no surprise to you, since you know that the focus of much of my research is parent-infant attachment, that earliest relationship. But I think that security is at the top of the list. It's the foundation of foundations, if you will, in human development. And there are several other things that are extremely important as well, but they all build on security. And by that, I mean a child's developing in the earliest days, weeks, months, and years, because it takes time to develop, a secure attachment where they really learn that they can trust this other person or these other people. Children have multiple attachments if they're fortunate, although there often is maybe one or two people who really are at the top of the heap, so that, for example, if a child got hurt or was upset about something, they would look for that person first. But if that person isn't there, hopefully there'd be at least a second, maybe even a third, who would give that child that sense of security. So that's about learning, for the child, learning that they can trust this other person or these other people to look out for them, to be crazy about them, hopefully. And in doing that, the child also learns to trust self, because they learn that they can do something active to engage the attention or the comfort or the play or whatever it is that they're needing, the stimulation or the lack of stimulation. So it's learning trust in other and trust in self. And I would put that as the top or the bottom of the foundation, rather than the top of the heap, I guess is a better way to say it, of those human potential elements that really matter.
And I want to continue on that vein, because development, and maybe it's because feel like I'm watching it in real time with these young children that I'm raising right now. And, it took me being a parent to come face to face with the fact that, the circumstances around parenting can be a lot, and that there can be pressures because you are, rearing something that is being shaped when we lay that foundation of security, what does that look like in practice?
Well, first of all, with security, with attachment, you are seeing that your child turns to you for comfort, for whatever it is that they need, but particularly at times of stress, at times of duress for a child, you really want to see that they have that clear connection with one or two people who really do then satisfy that need. So that's the most visible. But the other side of that is that when a child is really building security, they then become free to explore the world, which is how children learn. And that includes exploring other people. Now, a child is not going to go up and, just be immediately comfortable with a stranger. They'll look back to see if you're there. You're their secure bait. Mm-hmm. And so you see your child looking to you. And maybe as they get a little older, in their toddler period, they're kind of raising their eyebrows or looking at you with a question, is it okay to do this? Right. Is this a safe thing? So that's about survival, first of all. But it's about so much more, because we really need children to be able to develop, initiative and autonomy that follow security. Sometimes parents try to push their kids, especially their male children, unfortunately, to be tough and to be independent too early. But if you want a male or a female to be really strong and healthy later on, you allow them to be dependent first, to have comfort and security in those early relationships. Beyond that, other things that are directly related to that security include self-regulation. And the research on this in my field of child development is so amazing, because we're learning that children build the capacity, the ability to regulate their emotions. And this is especially important at times of stress, or when they're experiencing maybe an uncomfortable medical procedure, for example. That's really tough for babies and young children. But we find that when they have that foundation of security, they do not react as extremely, even to very difficult, stressful things. They don't produce such high levels of cortisol, a stress hormone, for example. And this is a really important point, because we're seeing that attachment, a secure attachment, is a buffer against producing these toxic stress hormones. Mm-hmm. Now, those stress hormones are important to motivate us to fight or flight if we're really threatened. But if a child is not finding security early on, then they will become reactive and go into fight or flight much more quickly, which works against their own interests. And secondly, if they have a lot of that stress hormone, cortisol, and other related hormones spiking up over and over again, that actually really undermines their brain development, and it puts them in almost a constant state of fight or flight. That's an extreme example, but there are too many kids who do have that experience. So self-regulation comes when they get comfort, and when they've learned to comfort themselves because they've had it from those trusted adults early on.
Yeah. It strikes me then that the best investment you can make is in that early relationship between the child, the family, and that environment, because then the secondary, tertiary effects that you may see later on in terms of behavioral issues, anxieties that lead to different things, you are actually solving for those problems right then and there, no? Absolutely.
And, one good example of this is empathy. And who doesn't want to be in relationship with people who have empathy? We all long for that, for people to try to see through our eyes and to try to understand our feelings and respond to them sensitively. And so when a baby is getting empathy from their parents, when they hear their parents and other caregivers, naming their feelings for them and stroking them, and, oh, you're feeling really sad right now, or you wish you could have that cookie. I mean, even little things that we have to set limits around with our children, we can still empathize with how they're feeling in that moment. And the big benefit of that is that that's where the child's development of empathy begins. And so we see this in, longitudinal research, prospective longitudinal research that I've been deeply involved in at the University of Minnesota over the decades of my career. In fact, we did a huge study that's been published everywhere in the world, I think, an ongoing study, actually, following parents who were having their children in the mid-70s That was me, for example. I wasn't in the study, but I was doing the study. And now those children are 47, 48 years old, and they have children, and many of them now have grandchildren, and the study is still going on. But we have learned so much from that prospective study about how these early experiences show up in children's lives at school, at work, with their marital partners as they grow up, and so on.
I mean, this all makes such clear and intentional sense to me. And yet there is this part of me that I can feel my own stress hormones releasing, because this is a high pressure situation in that, I've never been this in love and full of joy and full of purpose as I've been as a parent. And yet there's also a lot of isolation. There's also a lot of feelings of inadequacy and exhaustion and financial duress, and things like that. So I want you to help me sort out how to approach this in a way that doesn't stress me. Because our early correspondence, we talked about this word quality parenting moments. It's hard for me to approach a concept of quality under this much pressure as a parent.
Well, I think you're saying what every parent feels, whether they speak it out loud or not. And these days, I think we have, a lot of parents who feel pressure to look perfect and, post all their precious moments online. And I just kind of cringe at that because, there are so many moments of angst in parenting. It is the hardest job anyone will ever do. I would say that and defend that to the death, that it is just the hardest job ever because you're responsible for this little human being. And that's daunting and awesome at the same time. But I think it really is important to go back to the concept of enough. And this is part of why my daughter and I call our podcast Mom Enough, but that applies to Dad Enough. And I've learned over the last 19 years that I've been a grandmother that being grandma enough is important too. And, this is all about caring for children. And so, yes, we have to be present and we have to be sensitive and responsive and predictable with our very, very young children, especially. But we do not have to hover. We do not have to achieve perfection. And this goes back to a British pediatrician and psychiatrist, Donald Winnicott, who wrote about the good enough mother. I would expand that to include the good enough father and others, as I've said. But, we don't have to be perfect, but the sum or the average of our interactions with our child need to be attentive and predictable, tender, bringing joy. And we want to have all those positive things in our relationship with our child. But we certainly don't have to be perfect. And we certainly all need help. We cannot do this alone. So you talked about isolation or prenatal, postnatal depression, which affects both women and men, by the way. We're learning a lot about how that affects fathers as well. And those are very real things. And so we really, as a society, need to think about the creative ways that we can make sure parents are supported and valued and not pushed to look so perfect on social media, but to really be honest about the difficulties. And I'll tell you, I think I mentioned this in one of our emails. I was born to teenage parents. My dad had dropped out of school after the 9th grade. My mom did finish high school, but then got pregnant right away. And they came from, my father in particular came from a family that was just full of mental health challenges, serious mental illness in some cases, and abuse and poverty, every kind of hardship. Family of 11 kids, lots of tragedy in that family. I've been writing a memoir, and when I wrote about those things that I experienced growing up because of that particular branch of the family, for the most part, my heart just ached for myself as a little girl, experiencing these things. But my father in particular was very difficult, and in a lot of ways, and I won't go into the details here. That's not the story we're doing today. But I will say that as a new mother, even though I had quite a bit of knowledge about child development and really this was a wanted child, this was my son, my older child, I found myself hearing at times of stress my father's voice coming out of my mouth. I felt his facial expressions on my face. I heard myself starting to say things that I never wanted to say to my child. And so I really had to dig deep to examine that. Those were the automatic lessons I'd had years before in how to be a parent, but that wasn't the parent I wanted to be. Not that my dad didn't bring a lot of good things to my life as well. He did. This is not an all or nothing thing. And my mother was there in many wonderful ways, but she never could quite protect me from my father's behavior. And so this was very real for me, even though I was in a good marriage and, wasn't poor anymore. My family, I'd grown up with poverty, but, things looked pretty good on the surface. But this was a struggle for me. And so I think we all have to just be willing to admit that and then talk about how we dealt with it. And social support was just key. I started a book group when my son was a newborn, and we still meet now 50 years later. And that's, that's been one source of support. I have a group of neighbor women that I walk around the lake. I live in Minneapolis most of the year. And, we've talked about everything. We've gone through all sorts of life events, the worst events and the best events for virtually all of us. So I just think we have to really be real about that and forgive ourselves when we do make mistakes, back up, reflect, and figure out how you're going to go forward and how you're going to muster all the resources you need to do that. Therapy really helps too. And I learned that firsthand, when I was a busy professor at the university and running into some very stressful things at work that I was taking home. And thank God for a good therapist who got me through that. And I taught my family, when you need help, get help. And that includes professional help when it's appropriate.
Yeah. You are tapping into this conversation that Jasmine and I just had. I really do think at the center of our families, there are these little things that act like superpowers that keep us together. Could you identify a superpower that your family might hang its hat on?
Well, I have to preface my personal answer to that question with just naming that I think every family's superpower ought to be here now. And, that's easier said than done. And so I've tried to do that. Sometimes I've done it really well. Sometimes we as a family have done it really well. And by that, I just mean, I don't mean hovering over your child. I mean, being a helicopter parent, you can do a lot of harm too. We have to look at the long haul. What are we really trying to do? My daughter, who's my co-host on Mom Enough, always says, our job as a parent is to put ourselves out of a job. Well, I take a little issue with that because I feel like I'm still parenting her and my son sometimes at times of duress. Right. But I think, being here now and not being looking at our phone all the time when we're trying to have a conversation or our kids or other loved ones are trying to have a conversation with us. So that's number one. And I think our family, we've struggled. We've had slip ups. We've really dropped the ball as many times as any other family I know with some of those basic things. But there are two superpowers that I think my family has really done well. And I'm really proud of this. And we're still very mindful of this. And now we have these wonderful 3-generation gatherings. I just adore my 5 grandchildren and love to see the people that are coming. But the two things that I think have really been notable, first of all, we have really tried to raise our children to be adults. And I think a lot of people miss that these days. But from the time our kids were 2, we gave them responsibilities. We expected them, the 2-year-olds love to fold that warm, soft pile of towels that's coming out of the laundry. They love to help set the table, plastic dishes probably, but there's so many responsibilities we can give our children. And along with that is engaging them in decisions that affect their lives and all of our lives. So even very young children, we can engage in making decisions about what we're going to eat, what we're going to do for recreation this weekend, what the house rules are going to be, or what their behavior should be when we go to the park. So really engaging kids in meaningful decisions. When my kids were teenagers, I didn't set the curfew. I asked them what they thought was a reasonable curfew, and we talked about it. And interestingly, they almost always set an earlier curfew than I would have. So, that worked out really well. But teaching them to be adults. And along with that, the third thing, as well as, giving them responsibilities and opportunities to participate in decisions, is being of service. And our kids and my grandkids, I look at my grandkids and I'm just amazing at what they're giving back to people around them and to the world as a whole. But then the second thing that I think we have really done well is to spark a sense of joy and adventure. And we've gone through rough times. I've had 2 bouts of cancer, one when my kids were young and one when my grandkids were young. We've gone through, all the ups and downs, I think, that every family goes through. But even at those times that were very challenging, we have managed to hold on to joy and adventure. And now we have the most amazing 3-generation trips. And, we're blessed to be able to do some travel together and to go skiing together and, sailing and hiking in mountains and all sorts of things. But I think those really have been important things. And just to remind ourselves to always look for the joy and look for the sense of awe of the world around us. We take a lot of comfort and find a lot of joy in nature. And even when, as now I'm just recovering from a knee replacement because of a previous ski accident. So now I'm not able to do the skiing with the family, at least not this year. But, we can still go sit out in the grass or, take a walk around the neighborhood together and talk about what we're doing and those sorts of things together, really being in relationship and making it fun.
Yeah. So if people want to listen or follow your podcast, where can they go?
Well, they'll find our podcast wherever podcasts are found, Apple Music and Spotify and so on. But we really, really love to have listeners come to our website, which is simply Mom Enough. No punctuation, no breaks, momenough.com. And the reason I like people to come there is that not only can they listen to this week's podcast, but they also can access an archive of, I think we're up to about 500 or 600 podcasts now, because we've been doing this since 2010. And before that, we were live on the radio. And then they also can download free resource sheets that are real accessible for parents that both our supporting partners, organizations that focus on children's health and well-being have provided, along with things that my daughter and I have written ourselves. So there are a lot of resources there. Everything is free because we do have good sponsors.
Marti, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you, Nathan. I hope we can work together again. We can maybe get you on our podcast to talk about the things you're doing out there in New Hampshire. Beautiful place, by the way. Wonderful place to live.
Well, you should know I am going to call you. And if you see a number from New Hampshire and somebody's screaming, "Mom, enough!" that's me.
You can call me anytime. Actually, I would welcome that.
This podcast was brought to you by Nixon Peabody, who delivers exceptional legal services for clients in the community by combining high performance, an entrepreneurial spirit, deep engagement, and an unwavering commitment to a culture of collaboration, diversity, and humanity. Nixon Peabody works with universities, hospitals, and nonprofits of every size to maximize impact. For more information, visit nixonpeabody.com. Many thanks to the Samuel P. Hunt Foundation for sponsoring this podcast. Established in 1951, Samuel P. Hunt Foundation is a Manchester-based, independent nonprofit that provides grants primarily for the arts, children and youth services, faith-based organizations, educational institutions, healthcare, and human services. New Hampshire Family Now is listed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and more. Listen wherever you get your podcasts or ask your smart speaker to play New Hampshire Family Now.